Chapter 4, Section 1. Sanshiro's mind had started to drift. When he sat in lectures, the words seemed to come from far away. On bad days, he'd miss writing down something important. At his worst, he felt like he was renting out someone else's ears just to get through the lecture. Sanshiro found the whole thing utterly ridiculous. Left with no other option, Sanshiro finally brought it up with Yojiro, telling him that lectures just hadn't been interesting lately. Yojiro's answer was always the same. There's no reason lectures would be interesting. You're a country boy, so you've been sitting through them all this time thinking something amazing was going to happen. What a waste of time. Their lectures have been like this since the dawn of time. No point getting disappointed about it now. That's not exactly it, but Sanshiro said, trying to defend himself. The contrast between Yojiro's breezy, flippant tone and Sanshiro's heavy, labored way of speaking was so mismatched it was almost funny. After going back and forth like that 2 or 3 times, somehow about 2 weeks had slipped by. Sanshiro's ears were gradually starting to feel like his own again. Then it was Yoshijiro's turn to look at Sanshiro and say, "You've got a strange look on your face. You look worn out by life. A real fin de siècle face," he declared. And Sanshiro, faced with this assessment, still kept repeating, "That's not quite it, but..." Sanshiro hadn't been breathing in enough of that artificial, affected atmosphere yet to get any kind of thrill out of a phrase like fin de siècle. Nor was he familiar enough with certain social circles to use it as an amusing toy. The one phrase that stuck with him a little was, "tired of life." Come to think of it, he did feel like he was starting to wear down. Sanshiro didn't think it was just the diarrhea. But he wasn't quite self-important enough to go around flaunting a world-weary face as some kind of fashionable philosophy. So the conversation didn't go any further than that. But then autumn deepened. His appetite came back. The season had arrived when there was simply no way a 23-year-old could stay weary of life. Sanshiro was out and about constantly. He walked around the university pond quite a few times, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. He went back and forth in front of the hospital more times than he could count, but only ordinary people ever crossed his path. He also stopped by Nonomiya's underground lab in the science building to ask about things, and Nonomiya told him his sister had already been discharged from the hospital. He thought about bringing up the woman he'd met in the entryway, but Nonomiya seemed too busy, so he held back and let it go. He figured that once he got out to Okubo and had a proper conversation with Nonomiya, he'd be able to learn the woman's name and background soon enough, so there was no need to rush. He let it go at that. And so he just drifted around, wandering here and there. Tabata, Dokanzan, the Somei Cemetery, Sugamo Prison, Gokokuji. Sanshiro even wandered all the way out to the Arayakushi Temple. On his way back from Arayakushi, he had been planning to swing by Okubo and stop in at Nonomiya's place, but he took a wrong turn near the crematorium at Ochiai and ended up in Takata instead. He ended up taking the train home from Majiro. On the train ride back, he ate a whole bag of chestnuts he'd bought as a souvenir, all by himself. Whatever was left, Yojiro came by the next day and polished off. The more Sanshiro drifted around, the happier he felt. At first, he had been paying too much attention in lectures, and the effort of listening so hard made it difficult to keep up with his notes. But lately, he had been taking it easy, and that was no longer a problem. During lectures, his mind wanders to all sorts of things, and he doesn't feel the least bit bothered about missing something. When he looks around, he realizes Yojiro and everyone else are doing exactly the same. Sanshiro was starting to think that this was probably good enough. And as his mind wandered through all sorts of thoughts, that ribbon kept showing up. And when that happened, he felt uneasy, deeply unsettled. He had an urge to go straight to Okubo and see for himself. But then some chain of thoughts or some outside distraction would pull him away, and before long it would all fade. So on the whole, he was pretty easygoing, just drifting along in a kind of daydream. He just never made it out to Okubo. One afternoon, Sanshiro was wandering around as usual, and from the top of Dangozaka he turned left and came out onto the wide street of Sendagi Hayashicho. It was a clear autumn day, and the Tokyo sky looked as deep and vast as the sky back home in the countryside. Just knowing he was living under a sky like this was enough to clear his head. And if you stepped out into the open fields, there was nothing better. Your spirit stretched out and your soul swelled to the size of the open sky. And yet your whole body felt pulled together and sharp. It was nothing like the lazy, loose warmth of spring. Sanshiro walked along, taking in the hedgerows on either side of the road, breathing in his very first autumn in Tokyo. At the bottom of the slope, a chrysanthemum doll exhibition had just opened a few days earlier. When Sanshiro turned the corner, he could even make out the banners. Now he could only hear the sound, the distant beat of festival music drifting over. Don-chan, Don-chan. The sound of the festival music rose gradually from below, spreading out into the crisp autumn air, until it faded into the faintest, most delicate ripple. The faint echo of that sound drifted all the way to Sanshiro's eardrums, then quietly faded away. Rather than feeling noisy, it was actually quite pleasant. Right. Just then, two figures appeared suddenly from the side street on the left. One of them spotted Sanshiro and called out, "Hey!" Yojiro's voice was unusually composed today, but he had someone with him. The moment Sanshiro saw who was with Yojiro, he knew right away, just as he had always suspected, that the man he had seen drinking tea at Aobado was none other than Hirota-san. Sanshiro had a strange connection with this man that went back to the time of the white peaches, especially since that time at Aoyodo, when the man had sat there drinking tea and smoking while sending Sanshiro running off to the library. The memory had stuck with him all the more vividly. He had the same face as always, like a Shinto priest's, but with a Westerner's nose. He was still wearing the summer clothes from the other day and didn't seem bothered by the cold at all. Sanshiro wanted to say something and greet the man properly, but so much time had passed since their last encounter that he had no idea how to even begin. He simply took off his hat and bowed. It was too formal for Yojiro, yet too casual for Hirota. Sanshiro landed somewhere awkwardly in the middle. Right away, Yojiro said, "This guy's a classmate of mine. He just came to Tokyo for the first time from a higher school in Kumamoto," Yojiro announced, broadcasting his country bumpkin status without even being asked. Then he turned towards Sanshiro. "And this is Prof. Hirota from the higher school," he said, introducing them both without any real ceremony. At that, Prof. Hirota said, I know him, twice over, which left Yojiro looking rather puzzled. But he didn't bother asking why or making a fuss about it. Right away he said, "Hey, you wouldn't happen to know of any houses for rent around here, would you? Anything spacious, clean, with a room for a student?" he asked. "A rental place, you say? Well, there is one." "Where? It better not be a dump." "No, there's a nice clean one. It's got a big stone gate out front." "Perfect. Where is it?" "Professor, a stone gate sounds wonderful." "Come on, let's go with that one." Yojiro was all fired up. "The stone gate won't do," the professor said. "Won't do? Well, that's a problem." "Why not?" "It's just no good, that's all." "But a stone gate is great. Doesn't it make you feel like a brand new baron, Professor?" Yojiro was dead serious. Prof. Hirota just smiled to himself. In the end, the serious side won out, and they agreed to at least go take a look, with Sanshiro leading the way. They headed back through the side street and came out onto the back road, where about half a block to the north, there was a narrow alley that looked like a dead end. Sanshiro led the two of them into the narrow lane. If you kept going straight, you'd end up in a gardener's yard. The three of them stopped about 5 or 6 ken before the entrance. On the right stood 2 rather large granite pillars, with iron gates between them. "That's the one," Sanshiro told them. Sure enough, there was a "For Rent" sign posted on it. "This place is something else," Yojiro said, giving the iron door a hard shove, but it was locked. "Wait here, I'll go ask," Yojiro said, and before the words were even out of his mouth, he dashed off toward the back of the nursery. Hirota and Sanshiro were left standing there on their own. The two of them started talking. "So, what do you think of Tokyo?" "Well, It's a big city, but a dirty one, don't you think? Well, and nothing really compares to Mount Fuji, does it? Sanshiro had completely forgotten about Mount Fuji. Now that Professor Hirota had pointed it out, Sanshiro remembered his first glimpse of Mount Fuji through the train window, and thinking back on it, yes, it really was something sublime. It was nothing compared to the jumble of the world crowding his head right now. Sanshiro felt a pang of shame, realizing he had somehow let that impression slip away completely. Just then, "Have you ever tried translating Mount Fuji?" came the unexpected question. Translating, you mean? When you translate nature, everything turns into something human, which is what makes it so interesting. Words like sublime, great, magnificent. Sanshiro understood what he meant by translation. They all become words that describe character. And anything that can't be translated into words of character, well, nature has had absolutely no influence on character at all. Sanshiro waited quietly, thinking there was more to come. But Prof. Hirota stopped right there. He peered toward the back of the nursery and, "I wonder what Sasaki is up to. He's taking forever," he said, almost to himself. "Shall I go check?" Sanshiro asked. "Nah, going to look for him won't make him come out any faster. Better to just wait here, saves the trouble," he said, crouching down beneath the trifoliate orange hedge and picking up a small stone, and started scratching something in the dirt. He was easygoing in his own way, the opposite direction from Yojiro's easygoing nature, but roughly the same degree. Just then, from beyond the pine trees in the garden, Yojiro called out in a loud voice, "Professor! Professor!" The professor kept right on drawing as if he hadn't heard a thing. It looked rather like a lighthouse, the way he was drawing. Since he wasn't answering, Yojiro had no choice but to come out. "Professor, come take a look." "Nice place, isn't it? The gardener keeps it up. We could have them open the front gate, but it's faster to go around the back." The three of them went around to the back. They slid open the rain shutters and went through the house room by room. It was the kind of place a middle-class family could live in without any embarrassment. The rent was 40 yen a month, with 3 months' deposit required. The three of them came back around to the front. "Why on earth were we looking at a place like that?" Prof. Hirota asked. "What do you mean, why?" "We were just looking, that's all. No harm in that," said Yojiro. "It's not like we're renting the place." "Well, I was planning to rent it, but they just wouldn't budge on the price. Wouldn't bring it down to 25 yen. Prof. Hirota just said, "Well, of course," and left it at that. Then Yojiro launched into the history of the stone gate. Until recently, it had stood at the entrance of a mansion that did business with them, and when the place was renovated, they were given it and put it up right there, he said. Leave it to Yojiro to dig up all kinds of odd little details about things. The three of them made their way back to the main road, then came down from Dozaka into the valley of Tabata, and by the time they reached the bottom, all three were simply walking in silence. The whole business about the rental house had been completely forgotten. Only Yojiro kept bringing up the stone gate every now and then. He mentions it cost about 5 yen in labor to haul that stone gate all the way from Kojimachi to Sendagi. And then he adds that the gardener who owns the place seems to be quite well off. He even went on to say something unnecessary, like who on earth would rent a 40-yen house built in a place like that? Eventually, he concluded that since no one would want to rent the place, the landlord would surely have to lower the price. And so he concluded that they should come back and negotiate once more and absolutely rent the place when the price came down. Prof. Hirota, for his part, didn't seem to share that view at all. He said, "You just kept rambling on, and that's why it took so long. You should know when to wrap it up and leave." "That took quite a while, didn't it? You were drawing something in there. You're awfully laid back, Professor." "Who's calling who laid back? What's that a picture of?" The professor said nothing. Just then, Sanshiro looked up with a serious expression and asked, "Is it a lighthouse?" The one who had drawn it, and Yojiro burst out laughing. "A lighthouse, that's a wild guess. So you're saying he drew Nonomiya Sohachi?" "Why?" "Nonomiya is a big name abroad, but back here in Japan, nobody knows him at all. All for a tiny salary, holed up in some underground pit. It's really just not worth it." Every time I see Nonomiya's face, I can't help feeling sorry for him. You only dimly light up about a 2-foot square patch around where you're sitting, so you're more like a paper lantern yourself. Being compared to a round paper lantern, Yojiro suddenly turned to face Sanshiro and asked, "Hey, Ogawa, what year of Meiji were you born?" Sanshiro simply replied, "I'm 23, he answered. "That sounds about right, I suppose. You know, Professor, I really can't stand expressions like round lantern or gooseneck and that sort of thing. Maybe it's because I was born after Meiji 15, but somehow those expressions just feel old-fashioned and off-putting." "What about you?" he said, turning to Sanshiro again. Sanshiro, "Personally, I don't mind them all that much," Sanshiro said. "Though I suppose since you just came out of the countryside in Kyushu, your way of thinking is probably stuck somewhere around the first year of Meiji." Neither Sanshiro nor Hirota had anything to say to that. A little further along, they were putting up a Western-style building painted bright blue on a patch of land where an old grove of cedar trees next to a temple had been cleared and leveled. Prof. Hirota took in the temple and the painted building with equal interest. "It's an anachronism. Japan's material world and its spiritual world are both exactly like this. You know the lighthouse at Kudan, don't you?" he said, bringing it up again. "That's an old one. It's featured in the Edo Meisho Zue. Now, Professor, don't kid around. No matter how old that lighthouse at Kudan is, there's no way it shows up in the Edo Meisho Zue." Prof. Hirota burst out laughing. It turned out he had actually gotten it mixed up with a woodblock print called Famous Sights of Tokyo. According to the professor, right next to this ancient lighthouse that had somehow survived all these years, a brand new brick building called the Kaikosha had gone up. Put side by side, the two looked absolutely ridiculous together. And yet nobody seemed to notice. Nobody seemed to care. This, he said, is what Japanese society is all about. Yojiro and Sanshiro both nodded along, and after passing in front of the temple, they walked 5 or 6 blocks and came upon a large black gate. Yojiro suggested they cut through and head out toward Dokanzan. Sanshiro asked if they were really allowed to cut through, and Yojiro insisted that it was fine, saying this was the old Satake estate and anyone could pass through. All 3 of them went along with it and ducked through the gate, made their way under the bamboo thicket, and had just reached the edge of an old pond when a guard came out and gave them a good scolding. Yojiro bowed and apologized to the caretaker. After that, they made their way through Yanaka, looped around Neizu, and got back to the lodgings in Hongo by evening. Sanshiro felt like he'd had the most carefree half-day he'd had in a long time. The next day, he went to school and found Yojiro wasn't there. He figured he might show up afternoon, but he never did. He checked the library too, but Yojiro was nowhere to be found. From 5 to 6, there was a lecture open to all students in the literature department. Sanshiro went to that. It was too dark to take notes. But it was too early for the electric lights to come on. The branches of the great Zelkova tree visible through the long, narrow windows were slowly fading into darkness. And inside the room, the faces of the lecturer and the students alike had all blurred into vague shadows. It all had a mysterious quality to it, like eating manju in the dark. Sanshiro found it oddly fascinating that he couldn't follow the lecture. Sitting there with his chin resting in his hand, his senses grew dull and his mind began to drift. And somehow that felt like exactly what a lecture was supposed to do. Just then the electric lights flickered on, and everything became a little clearer. Suddenly, all he wanted was to head back to his lodgings and eat. The professor, sensing how everyone felt, wrapped up the lecture at a reasonable point. Sanshiro walked back quickly to Oiwake. He changed out of his clothes and sat down at the dinner tray where he found a letter lying beside a cup of steamed egg custard. The moment Sanshiro saw the handwriting on the envelope, he knew right away it was from his mother. He felt a pang of guilt, realizing he had completely forgotten about her for the past 2 weeks and more. From yesterday into today, it had been all anachronisms, the personality of Mount Fuji, and that mystical lecture. That woman's image hadn't crossed his mind at all. That was enough for Sanshiro. He decided to read his mother's letter later at his leisure, and for now he finished his meal and lit a cigarette. Watching the smoke drift, Sanshiro found himself thinking back to the lecture he'd just heard. Just then, Yojiro wandered in out of nowhere. Sanshiro asked why he'd skipped class, and Yojiro said he'd been out looking for a rental place, so class was the last thing on his mind. "Are you really in that big a rush to move?" Sanshiro asked. "We were supposed to move last month, but I've already made them wait until the Tenchosetsu holiday the day after tomorrow, so there's no way around it. I have to find something by tomorrow." "Do you know of any place?" he asked. For someone in such a rush, he had spent the whole previous day wandering around aimlessly, supposedly looking for a rental but with nothing to show for it. Sanshiro could barely make sense of it. Yojiro explained that it was because the professor had been with them. To begin with, it's completely wrong for the professor to be out hunting for a house. He's never done anything like that in his life, so something must have gotten into him yesterday. And to top it off, we got a real earful at the Satake estate, made complete fools of ourselves. "Hey, do you know of any place?" he suddenly pressed. It was pretty clear that was the whole reason Yojiro had come over. When Sanshiro pressed him for the real reason, it turned out that the current landlord was a moneylender who kept jacking up the rent, and that had gotten under Yojiro's skin, so apparently Yojiro had been the one to give notice on their behalf. So that meant Yojiro was the one responsible. "I went all the way out to Okubo today, but still nothing. Oh, and speaking of Okubo, I stopped by Sohachi's place while I was there and saw Yoshiko. Poor thing, she still doesn't look well. A real hot-tempered beauty. Her mother asked me to say hello to you. But things seem to have settled down in that neighborhood since then, and there haven't been any more deaths on the track since then, apparently." Yojiro's conversation kept jumping from one thing to the next. He was always a bit scattered, and today the house hunting had him even more wound up than usual. Every time there was a pause in the conversation, he'd chime in like clockwork, asking again and again whether Sanshiro knew of any place available. Eventually, Sanshiro started laughing too. After a while, Yojiro finally started to settle down, even borrowing Chinese phrases like, "Autumn evenings are perfect for reading," and seeming quite pleased with himself about it. The conversation drifted, almost by accident, to the subject of Professor Hirota. "What's your professor's name, anyway?" He wrote the character with his finger and said, "The name is Cho, but it has a grass radical that doesn't belong there. I wonder if it's even in the dictionary. What a strange name to give someone. Has he been at a higher school the whole time?" From way back to this very day, a higher school professor. Remarkable, really. They say it's the same day after 10 years, but it's been more like 12 or 13 by now. "Does he have any kids?" "Kids? He's not even married yet." Sanshiro was a little surprised. He wondered how someone could still be living alone at that age. Why hasn't he ever taken a wife? That's exactly what makes the professor the professor. He's a tremendous theorist, you see. Apparently, he'd already made up his mind that wives were no good, all through pure theory, before he'd ever even tried having one. Pretty foolish, if you ask me. So he's always contradicting himself. He goes on about how Tokyo is the dirtiest place on earth. So when he sees a grand stone gate, he probably freaks out and says things like no good, or too impressive for its own good. Well then, maybe he should go ahead and try having a wife too. Maybe he'd say something like, "Oh yes, quite splendid," or something along those lines. The professor talks about how dirty Tokyo is and how ugly Japanese people are. But has he ever actually been abroad? Not on your life. That's just the kind of person he is. His head is always way ahead of the facts, so that's how he ends up. But to make up for it, he studies the West through photographs. He's got a whole collection of them. The Arc de Triomphe in Paris, the Houses of Parliament in London, you name it. And then he judges all of Japan against those photos. No wonder everything looks dirty to him. And yet he doesn't seem to mind at all how dirty his own place is, which is pretty funny when you think about it. He rode in 3rd class, you know. Does he grumble about it being filthy? No, he didn't complain much at all. Still, the professor is quite the philosopher, isn't he? Does he teach philosophy at school or something? No, he only teaches English at the school, but what makes him interesting is that the man himself has just naturally turned into a philosopher. Has he written anything? Nothing, really.
He writes the occasional paper, but it never gets any response. That's just not going to cut it.
The world just has no idea he exists, so there's nothing to be done about it. The professor called me a paper lantern, but the master himself is a great darkness. Someone should really get him out into the world. Get him out into the world, sure, but Professor, he's the kind of person who doesn't do anything for himself. For a start, he can't even get his 3 meals a day without me around. Sanshiro laughed as if to say he couldn't possibly believe that. I'm not lying. He really can't do anything for himself. It's almost sad. I handle everything by telling the maid exactly how the professor likes things done. But never mind those little details. From now on, I'm going to make a big move, and I'm going to make the professor a university professor. Yojiro was completely serious. Sanshiro was taken aback by the boast. And that was fine, because letting himself be taken aback, he just went along with it. And in the end, "When you move, make sure you come help me out," Sanshiro said. He spoke as if a place had long since been found and the whole thing was already settled. It was close to 10 by the time Yojiro left. Sitting alone in the quiet, Sanshiro felt a faint chill in the air. He suddenly noticed that the window in front of his desk was still open. He slid the shoji aside and found it was a moonlit night. The hinoki cypress that always put him in a foul mood was now touched by pale blue light, its dark shadowed edges blurring softly into a kind of haze. Sanshiro thought it was unusual to see autumn come to a hinoki cypress, then slid the storm shutters closed. He got straight into bed. Sanshiro was less of a studious type and more of a wandering, contemplative one, so he didn't read all that many books. But when something truly moving crossed his path, he would turn it over and over in his mind, savoring it fresh each time. That, to him, was what gave life its real depth. On any other night, he would have happily replayed moments like the sudden flash of the electric lights during that mysterious lecture, going over it again and again in his mind. But tonight there was his mother's letter to deal with first. So, then he started sorting through it. The letter said that Shinzo had given her some honey, and she was mixing it with shochu and drinking a cup every night. Shinzo was a tenant farmer on their property, and every winter he'd bring over 20 bales of rice as payment. He was an honest man through and through, but he had a terrible temper, and every now and then he'd beat his wife with a piece of firewood. Lying in bed, Sanshiro let his mind drift back to the time about 5 years ago when Shinzo had first started keeping bees. He spotted 200 or 300 honeybees hanging from the chinqua pin tree out back, and right away he blew sake through a rice funnel at them and caught every last one alive. He put them in a box, cut a hole so they could come and go as they pleased, and set it out on a sunny stone. And the bees kept on multiplying. One box wasn't enough, so he got a second. That wasn't enough either, so he added a third. He kept going like that until now, apparently, he had somewhere around 6 or 7 boxes. He mentioned that once a year he would take one of the boxes down from the stone and cut out the honeycomb for the bees. Every summer when he came home on break, she never failed to promise him some honey, yet she had never once actually brought any. But this year, his memory must have suddenly sharpened, because he finally made good on his long-standing promise. There was also a note saying that Heitaro had come by asking him to come see the stone monument he'd put up for his father. When he went to see it, there it was, right in the middle of the bare, red earth of a garden with not a tree or blade of grass in sight made of granite. The letter says Heitaro is very proud of that granite stone. It took several days to haul it down from the mountain, and then the stonemason charged him 10 yen. Farmers and the like might not know about these things, but since your young master has gotten into university, he'll surely be able to tell good stone from bad. He's asking if you could mention it in your next letter, and get her to say something nice about the stone monument he had made for his father, all for 10 yen. Sanshiro broke into a quiet chuckle all by himself. This was far more over the top than the stone gate at Sendagi. Then came a request for a photograph of him in his university uniform. Sanshiro made a mental note to have one taken for her someday, then moved on to the next letter, and sure enough, there was Omitsu from Miwata. The other day, Omitsu's mother came by to say that Sanshiro would be graduating from university before long. She wanted to know if Sanshiro would be willing to marry her daughter once he graduated. Omitsu is a good-looking girl with a gentle nature. The family has a fair amount of farmland, and on top of that, there's the long-standing connection between our two families. It would work out well for both sides, she wrote, and then added a note at the end. Omitsu would be thrilled, I'm sure. Tokyo people, you never know what they're really thinking, and I want nothing to do with that. Sanshiro rolled the letter back up, tucked it into its envelope, set it on his pillow, and closed his eyes. A rat suddenly started scurrying around up in the ceiling, but after a while it went quiet.